Dyson did not begin with a perfect invention. It began with frustration. That is what makes the story so strong, because one of the most famous product companies in the world was not built on some grand vision from day one. It was built on irritation, a vacuum cleaner that kept losing suction. That sounds small, almost boring. But some of the biggest businesses in the world begin with very ordinary anger. Something does not work the way it should. People get used to it, they accept it, they work around it, and then one person refuses to accept it. That was James Dyson. In the late 1970s, he became frustrated with how his vacuum cleaner kept losing performance as the dust bag clogged. Dyson's own account says he took it apart, saw the bag pores clogging with dust, and realized suction was dropping for a reason that people had simply learned to live with. That matters, because this was not just about cleaning. It was about a much bigger idea. Why do so many products quietly get worse while people keep buying them anyway? That is an incredible business question, and once you start asking it, you begin seeing opportunity everywhere. James Dyson had already worked with industrial cyclone technology in another context. He had seen how centrifugal force could separate particles from air, and that led to a dangerous thought. What if the same principle could work inside a vacuum cleaner? That was the beginning. Not a polished product, not a clear path to market, just a question. And questions like that are powerful because they attack assumptions people have stopped noticing. Vacuum cleaners were supposed to lose suction. That was normal. Bags were supposed to be replaced. That was normal too. The whole category had organized itself around an accepted weakness. Dyson looked at that weakness and saw a business. That is the turning point. Because many people notice bad products, very few decide to rebuild the category, and rebuilding it was not easy, not remotely. James Dyson's own history says it took 5 years and 5,127 prototypes to create the first working cyclonic vacuum cleaner. 5 years, 5,127 tries. That number matters because it destroys the clean fantasy people like to tell about innovation. People love the myth of the sudden breakthrough, the flash of genius, the one beautiful moment where everything clicks. Real product building is usually uglier than that. You test, you fail, you change something small, you fail again, you keep going, and after enough repetitions, the thing starts becoming real. That is what happened here. Prototype after prototype, Dyson kept trying to solve the same stubborn problem, build a vacuum that would not lose suction as it filled with dust. And eventually, he did. At that point, most people would assume the hardest part was over. It was not, because invention is only half the story. The other half is whether the world lets the invention in. And this is where Dyson becomes even more interesting. Once the product was ready, he needed manufacturers. That sounds obvious. But the big manufacturers did not want it. Dyson's own account says manufacturers were reluctant to take the risk. And the reason was not mysterious. A bagless vacuum threatened an industry that made money from replacement bags. That is a brutal business lesson. Sometimes a better product is not rejected because it is weak. Sometimes it is rejected because it is too disruptive to the people already profiting from the old model. That is a very different kind of barrier. The invention worked, but the incentives around the market were broken. This is where a lot of founders die. Not literally, commercially, because they think, if the product is better, the market will welcome it. No, not always. If your product attacks the economics of the existing system, the gatekeepers may resist it precisely because it is good. That is what Dyson was up against. So the real turning point was not just the 5,127th prototype. It was the moment he refused to give up after the rejection. That is the part people miss. A lot of stories celebrate persistence in the lab, but there is another kind of persistence. persistence after the market tells you no. That kind is even rarer. Eventually, Dyson's first commercial machine, the G-Force, launched in Japan in the 1980s, where it gained attention as a high-end product. Later, Dyson launched his own company and, in 1993, released the DC-01, the first bagless vacuum cleaner launched in Europe, which Dyson describes as the start of the company people now recognize. And this is where the story stops being about an inventor and becomes about a company. Because now the question is no longer, can you build it? Now the question becomes, can you make people care? That is where Dyson did something powerful. The company did not just sell a vacuum, it sold a visible solution to a frustration people already knew. Loss of suction, dust, mess, weak performance. And the bagless design made the difference visible. That matters more than people think. A product becomes much stronger when the benefit is not hidden inside a technical spec sheet. It becomes stronger when people can see it. The clear bin, the constant suction claim, the dramatic contrast with old bag systems. Now the product did not need a lecture. It explained itself. That is one of the strongest positions a business can have. When the design itself tells the story. And then something even bigger happened. Dyson was no longer just solving a vacuum problem. It was establishing a pattern. Take an everyday product people tolerate. Find the hidden weakness they have accepted. Re-engineer the thing from first principles. Make the improvement obvious. Charge for real performance. That is not just one invention. That is a business model. That is why Dyson became more than a vacuum brand. Because once a company learns how to attack stale categories, it can keep doing it again and again. That is how ordinary appliances turn into a technology brand. But it all came from the same place: annoyance. A man looked at a machine that kept getting worse as you used it and refused to call that normal. That is what built Dyson. Not inspiration in the romantic sense, not a lucky accident, not timing alone. Relentless refusal. 5 years, 5,127 prototypes. Rejection from manufacturers. And then a decision to keep going anyway. That was Dyson's turning point. Not the first idea, not even the first working prototype. The real turning point was the decision to keep pushing after both engineering difficulty and market resistance, because that is when a frustrated inventor starts becoming a founder, and that is why the story still hits. A lot of people want innovation to feel elegant, but some of the strongest companies are built in a much less glamorous way, by someone who gets annoyed, stays annoyed, and works long enough to turn that irritation into an industry. That was Dyson's turning point. Not genius in one moment. Persistence, 5,127 times.